everyone. So great to see all of you on the call. I'm sure there will be more. And it is my absolute pleasure to see so many of you joining our webinar today from ICF South Florida. Good to see you. Let's do a quick hello, some grounding. Let's take a deep breath. We're going through there's 5 stages of crisis management, and we're in the management stage still of the crisis. So breathing from time to time helps a lot. And so glad that you're joining. And I'm delighted to welcome Angelique Rewers to our community of coaches. Angelique has been a champion for the coaching community, and I call her the queen, the master of marketing and selling and prospecting. She does this with such tact and strategic thinking. You will learn a lot today. There'll be a lot thrown at you today. Take notes, and go to the webinars. Join the force on her Facebook because you'll learn a lot. And she has been called the undisputed champion at helping small businesses land big clients by Inc. magazine. I joined your conference, Angelique, in 2018, was it? And I learned so much. Tom was sitting next to me and many others who joined your force as well. Awesome. And definitely the things I learned came at a time when I felt lost, not confident at all, and not knowing what to do. I had left corporate and going into the world on my own, and it was the scariest thing to do. The best thing to do for me, but yet the scariest. And you were there, full force, sharing why we should be living the life we want to live. She's navigated all sides of the corporate, from the buying table for more than 2 decades. And now her team offers business training and advice to thousands of small businesses across 72 countries. And what is the key thing with Angelique is we don't talk low numbers, we talk 5, 6, and 7-figure plus numbers. Major brands like IBM, Intel, HP, PayPal, AT&T, Marriott together, even Major League Baseball, to help work together more effectively. And her clients, I can assure you, I know some of them, have landed major deals with iconic brands like Facebook and Google and many others. Angelique, without further ado, I welcome you and I thank you for giving us the time, your time today to be with us. I know how your schedule is.
Well, thank you, Livna. It's so great to be here with all of you. I had a chance to meet some of you. Oh my gosh, it's been about 2 years now since I had a chance to meet some of you in person at a chapter meeting that was hosted. It was so great to do that. And we were supposed to all be together in person. Oh my gosh, about 5 or 6 months ago, right before the pandemic hit, we were going to do an in-person session, and we thought maybe if we waited a little bit, we could do it in person, but here we are in September and we're all still just doing our best, right, to keep our businesses moving and keep things flowing during what is obviously a really challenging year. I think we all knew that 2020 was destined to be a year of change. Do you guys remember about, oh my gosh, 15 plus years ago, companies started rolling out their Vision 2020s? Do you guys remember that? It was like everything was Vision 2020. I don't think anybody had this vision of 2020, but here we are. And, you know, I personally am a big believer and practice, you know, someone who really pays attention to universal laws. And one of the universal laws is the law of polarity, and the idea that the opposite of nothing exists in half, and the opposite of everything is present at the same time as the other. And so even though we have all of these challenges right now in the world, indeed unprecedented challenges, that also means we have unprecedented opportunity. We can't forget that. That is the other side of that, you know, that yin to that yang, is for all of the unprecedented challenges, we have unprecedented opportunity. I've been a champion of coaches for almost 7 years now, really since I started working with the coaching space and realizing how important coaches are to the world transforming. I just want to say that right now, where we are on the eve of really just watershed change pouring through all levels of business, from major global corporations, NGOs, nonprofits, universities, colleges, state, local government, federal, international organizations, and governments. They need you more than they've ever needed you. And of course, as the universe would have it, it also means, though, that you're going to have to move through more sales and marketing challenges than you may have had to deal with previously. So now is a great time to really focus on taking your marketing and your sales strategies to the next level. There are some reports that about 50% of all buying decisions have been put on hold across all sectors and all levels of the business space, from solo business owners all the way up to major corporations, that about 50% of buying decisions are in sort of a wait and see holding pattern. So that means every opportunity that comes your way is a critical opportunity to your coaching business. It also means, though, that you have to do more. You have to do more in order to fill that pipeline. You're going to have to change, everything in our business is cause and effect. You're going to have to change some of your actions, you guys, in order to really thrive during this space. Interestingly enough, though, these organizations do need you more than they've ever needed you before. We had a guest expert on a challenge that we're leading yesterday. She focuses on international outer space law of the third millennia. But she was sharing with us that one of her friends, who's a billionaire, was saying to her, look, every business that we're focusing on right now, we're looking at how do we move 20 times faster? How do we move 20 times faster than how we were moving pre-pandemic? I think that's a very interesting question to ask yourself. Is it even possible to move 20 times faster? What would that even look like? So what I'm going to do today, where I'm going to focus my time with you guys today, is on really how to have conversations with your prospects, especially early on, knowing that buying decisions are on hold, knowing that there are less opportunities out there. I want you to go into those conversations more armed than you've ever been, more prepared for those conversations than you've ever been. So that's what I want to focus on with you guys today. Before I get into this, I do have a quick question. I'm curious if you can just pop in the chat area for me, and I'm just gonna try to pull this up here onto my screen. If you can just share for me in the chat area. I'm curious, were any of you in Prague for the ICF Converge conference? Because if you were, and you heard my session there, then you might know some of the answers to what I'm about to ask. But I spoke at the ICF Converge conference in Prague. If you were there, let me know. I'm going to count you out for one of the quick exercises I have here, because you'll know. Okay, good. It doesn't seem like anybody was there. Okay, cool. All right. So one thing I do want to share with you right off the bat is that we spend a lot of time talking to corporate decision makers about what's going on inside their organizations. In fact, we've spent the last 3 to 4 months talking to decision makers about what's going on in their organizations right now. And it's sort of like a tale of two cities. It's a tale of two different worlds of what's going on inside of organizations. On one hand, they have things that have slowed down to the speed of molasses. On the other hand, they have things that are moving faster than they can even keep up with. Decisions that used to take them years, they are making those decisions within days and at times hours. So they have condensed years worth of, stuff into days and hours right now. They have things that they are having to execute within days and weeks instead of months and years. And so they are operating without a playbook right now. They have very little plans in place. They are taking the timeline of the things that they're looking at doing in much shorter increments now. So the horizon of how far out they're looking has really shrunk in because they feel like until we get to the next turning point with the pandemic, whether that's you know, the virus changes, whether the vaccine comes out, whether there's a new treatment, that if you get COVID, that it's not a big deal. You take, you know, medication for a week and you're fine. Until we have another domino fall, they're really taking a much shorter view of what they want to work on. And they're looking at places where they can be opportunistic and use this time very wisely. And other things, they're taking much shorter bites of it, much smaller bites, instead of, you know, completely doing massive enterprise-wise transformation. So keep that in mind as we go through the content today in terms of what's going on for folks. Lubna already mentioned this, but our clients are working with almost every one of the Fortune 500 brands that are out there, but they're not just working with those. They're working with nonprofits and NGOs, state, local, federal government, colleges and universities, large, small enterprises, so 50-person, 100-person, 200-person companies, as well as the mid-market companies, which that's where the biggest money is, right? In the whole market is actually the mid-market companies. They have more money than anybody. They're the ones who create all the job growth. They're the ones who create the GDP growth. So there's a lot of those out there as well. So if you work with any of these types of clients, what we're talking about today applies. You don't just have to use this with the major corporations. Some of it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable in terms of when we get into how to really take control of those sales conversations, especially because the coaching techniques that you all use are a bit different than when you're really taking control in the sales conversation. And I will be very straight with you. We do see coaches sometimes struggle with that, because when you're using your proven coaching techniques, when you're in a relationship with your client as their coach, versus when you're sitting in the chair as the CEO of your coaching firm, those are two very different hats that you're wearing. I spoke at the ICF I want to say Midwestern Regional Conference. I may have butchered that a few years ago. It was probably back in like, oh my gosh, it was probably back in about 2015, I would say. And I said to the room, what business are you in? Tell me what business you're in. And everyone raised their hand. It must have been about 70 people. And then I said, and everyone said, oh, I coach executives, I coach women, I coach, you know, first time managers, I coach millennials, you know, everybody, that's the business I'm in. And we had a really interesting discussion around this, because I said, yeah, you know, you're not in the business of coaching at all. You're in the business of selling coaching services. That's the business you're in. Now, the craft you're in, the field that you're in as a practitioner is absolutely all of those things. But as the owner of your coaching business, unless you're an employee working for someone else, you're in the business of selling your coaching services. And so it's really important that whenever you're engaging with a client, you're very clear which hat you're wearing throughout this process, which is actually going to make you a better coach anyway, because if you set better boundaries with the clients early on from a sales perspective, you're going to actually maintain that authority as you move into that coaching practitioner. When you do this, I promise you everything changes in your business. Our clients go from closing, you know, $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 coaching engagements to creating $100,000 months in their business. And these are coaches. Some of them are trainers, some of them are consultants, but a lot of them are coaches. All right, so what I want to do is I want to open up everybody's mind a little bit today. So I have a fun little exercise for you. There's going to be a video. So hopefully, now look, I saw Anne driving in a car earlier when I had my gallery view up. So Anne, if you're still driving in that car right now, please do not do this exercise. Those of you who are safely seated at a desk, I want you to do an exercise for me. I want you to take out a sheet of paper. Hopefully it's a blank sheet of paper. It doesn't have anything written. And as big as possible on this sheet of paper, I want you, now this is hard, so we're going to see if you guys can do this. I want you to write big, a lowercase printed letter G, no cursive, a lowercase printed letter G. So if everybody can just take a second and write that, and then I'm going to expand my gallery view here so I can see all of you. Ready, write down their letter G. All right, and those of you who I can't see, I'm just gonna trust Suzanne and Corinne and Maritza and Nicole and Jimmy. I'm gonna trust that you guys are doing this exercise. All right, so I want you to hold up your lowercase letter G. Let me see it. Hold it up. Can I see it here? All right, awesome. Very good. All right, looking good. So most people wrote a G like this, right? Yes, everybody's G. If you guys are not on camera, can you tell me, did your G look similar to what this G looks like? Yes?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to do it again. We're going to do it again. You're going to write a lowercase printed, not cursive, a lowercase printed letter G, but not that one. Don't look at anything around. You can't look at anything, can't cheat. I need you, so don't find something somewhere. I need you to write another lowercase letter G, but not that one. Does everybody have another G? All right, hold up your G. Looking over here, my screen's little with all these G's. Looks like an awful lot of the same letter G's. Okay. All right, I'm gonna let you in on something. Did anybody have number 3? Did anybody have that one? All right. Oh, it didn't do it. Sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. Here we go. So many people had the exact same reaction.
Oh, okay. All right, wait. Am I crazy?
They have no idea what we're talking about.
I need you to tell me which one is the right one. Take your time. Which one is the real letter?
Well, I think we all, if we've been to school, think that we know our ABCs, right? We think if I asked you about a letter, you would know what it looked like. But many people don't seem to be aware of a very, very common form of the letter G.
It's a letter shape that people see all the time, millions and millions of times throughout their life, and yet many people are unaware that it exists.
Have you ever written this G before?
And even when they are aware it exists, they're unable to recall the exact shape.
I think we only had one participant out of all of our participants who even wrote it close to correct.
And this is my attempt.
Many researchers are thinking now that learning to write plays an important role in learning to read. We're writing less and less in our culture nowadays. This kind of gives us an intriguing way of looking at some of those questions.
The main thing that this makes us question is the notion that if you see something enough times, you know it.
There are things that we see in everyday life all the time, but somehow don't possess enough knowledge of it to access it consistently.
I believe this is the G you attempted to write. That's the G I was trying to do.
The devil's in the details.
So if any of you had trouble hearing parts of that, so Johns Hopkins basically did a research study and they looked at how many people out there understood that there was this other lowercase letter G. It's a letter G that we see millions and millions of times. I mean, think about it. If you were to pick up a newspaper or read a magazine, whatever your favorite magazine, every time the letter G is used, almost every time, it's that other letter G that's used, yet we haven't built the muscle memory to recreate that letter G. And yet it's there, it's in our environment all the time. And yet out of all the people that Johns Hopkins University studied, only one person even got it slightly close to the right answer. And this is a pretty simple thing, right? I mean, it is just a lowercase letter G. The reason I share that with you is because typically when I get into teaching people how to have sales conversations with prospects in a way that allows them to best help their client, but also help themselves as a business owner and make sure that they're not getting sucked into a lot of the problems that come up all the time for people, they'll say, oh, I've heard that before, or, oh, I kind of sort of do that, or, yeah, that makes sense. But they have no muscle memory of actually doing it. So when we actually observe, and we like to do that, we'll often have people record their sales conversations. We'll have them role play. We'll watch them do it whenever we can. And even people sometimes who've studied with us are still not actually implementing these strategies. So I want to put that forward to you guys as coaches. I know you guys are ones to hold your clients accountable. I really want to challenge you to put this into action this week or next week. Put it into action right away, because unless you're actually using the techniques we're talking about and you're actually practicing saying the words, it's going to be just as difficult as recalling that letter G. In fact, I would even encourage members of this chapter to get together and to go through the scripting I'm going to show you with one another to the point that it feels really natural and you've put it in your own language and your own words. And we'll do that with our clients as well. We'll have them really role play. And it makes a big difference, because unless you've actually said the words out loud a number of times, it's going to be just as difficult as writing that letter G. Very quickly, I do just want to talk numbers. Lubna mentioned numbers. I just want to talk about the fact that even though we are in this very strange environment right now with the pandemic, there is still a significant amount of revenue that's out there. Over $370 billion is spent every year on employee training programs. Over $56 billion is spent just in the United States on consulting programs, and another $12.7 billion is spent globally on coaching. So there is a lot of revenue out there. And if we look at the Great Recession of 2009 as just even a slight benchmark for what we might see in 2020, revenue went down about 20% between 2007 and 2009. It dropped all the way down to $244 billion. But that's still $244 billion. If I took all the other bar charts away from all the other years, and I just showed you $244 billion in employee training spend, you would think that that's a big number. Based on what we're seeing so far, I think we're going to be down probably about 70 to 90 billion from last year to this year with employee training spend. In some sectors, they've actually expanded it. They've actually increased the amount of money. One of the largest consulting companies in the world actually took between 60 and 100 billion, $60 million, I should say, and reallocated those dollars back into their culture and back into their employees. So a tremendous amount of money is out there. Even though we're going to take a hit, the market is still huge. So today what I want to show you guys is the 5-part conversation framework to really taking control of client conversations, so that when you do win those opportunities, you don't end up in this situation right here, which is the tail wagging the dog. And that is usually what happens in conversations, unless you're talking to somebody in procurement, supply chain, or purchasing. And depending on the company, they might use any combination of those. But unless you're talking to procurement, purchasing, or supply chain, they are not trained in how to hire you. They are not trained. If you're the head of corporate communications and you are having conflict on your team and employees aren't taking accountability and you're feeling overwhelmed because you just became the director of corporate communications and you know you need to bring a coach in to work with your organization, you've had zero training on how to meet with an outside expert, a consultant, a coach, a trainer, a speaker, a service provider, and actually have that conversation in a way that is productive, that moves the process forward, that gets to the right answer. The only way that you've ever learned as a corporate decision maker how to work with an outside expert is by watching your boss or your boss's boss or another leader in the organization. And typically what you see is they'll have someone come in and maybe the person gives a sales pitch, maybe they don't give a sales pitch, maybe the boss just sort of throws everything up onto the table and says, you know, this is our problem, can you go put together a proposal for us, and come back with a proposal. And then they get the proposal back, and what do, guys? What do? Tell me in the chat what they do when they get their proposal back. It's really one of two things typically, right, that they do. I'm waiting. Can they all chat? There you go. Talk money, never read it. That's exactly right, Lubna. They never read it. They either push it off to the side because they're distracted with the fire drill of the day. They start challenging on pricing. They get overwhelmed by it and they disappear and they don't call you guys back, right? And now you're like, what do I say to get a response? How many times should I follow up with them? Should I send another follow-up? I don't know what else to say. How can I get them to come back? Or they start going back and forth on the numbers. It is one of the most inefficient processes ever. I am on a mission in my life to rid the world, eradicate the world of proposals, because the research is clear that proposals have a very negative impact on the results that organizations ultimately get, because the outside vendor is guessing what that company really needs. It is not a collaborative process. And so then we see studies from organizations like Bain & Company that show that only about 8% of corporate decision makers feel like they've had a huge value add from the outside vendors, consultants, coaches, and other professional service providers that they hire. Only 8%. So that means that 92% did not feel so good about it. That's terrible. And we don't want that to happen to you guys either. So we want to help you avoid that. So what are some of the biggest challenges? So that's a big one, right? Putting together a proposal that ends up going nowhere. They just start confronting you, challenging you, trying to bring down your pricing. We also know a big challenge right now with coaches is that it can be commoditized. There are these big coaching organizations out there that just have these, you know, huge stables of coaches. It's $75 an hour for a company to send people through. And it's really more of a convenience than a high quality interaction with an experienced coach. So what are some of the other challenges? One is saying per hour thinking versus value of transformation. That's exactly right. That's that whole commodity idea. Let me just hire you for the hour versus let's create a transformative program for your organization that, by the way, is an equitable exchange of value for the services that my coaching firm is providing to you, right? So that's huge. Response times are huge. Yeah, 3 to 6 versions of the proposal, which should never, ever happen. Imagine if you're the corporate decision maker, by the way. Imagine that you're the director of facilities management, or you're the executive vice president of engineering and manufacturing. Do you really have time to go back and forth with an outside consultant 5 or 6 times? Of course not. Understanding the process, exactly. Right. So these are all things. And a lot of these problems, I have to tell you, are a lot like toothpaste. Once you get far enough in the process with a prospect, you've let the toothpaste out of the tube. And it's very difficult to get that toothpaste back in the tube. In fact, most coaches and consultants actually try to find a strategy that's at the point that the toothpaste is out of the tube. And they're saying, just like when the prospect goes MIA, missing in action, after you sent over the proposal, well, that was too late. The time to solve that problem was before you sent over the proposal. It was never agreeing to send over a proposal in the first place, right? So that's when you solve that problem. You don't wait until they've asked for the proposal. Now you're sending it over. They're missing in action. They're coming back arguing on pricing. That's not when you solve that problem. We don't want to solve it there. It's all, the landmine has already exploded at that point. What are you going to do? We have to just not step on that landmine, or at least not plant those landmines for ourselves by getting out in front of it. So what I'm gonna do today, we teach a business development framework for how you run your business, your marketing, your sales, your business development, so that everything has a home and it all works together. Every system works with every other system in your business. Today, we're gonna focus on system F, excuse me, which is the conversations create cash system. So you guys are coaches. You might have things that you sell online. You might have a toolkit. You might have books, but the transformative work that you all do all comes from you having conversations with decision makers. So your conversations that create cash system is one of the most important systems that you have in your business. So I'm going to walk you through, there are 7 different conversations that create cash in your business. There are things like bounce meetings and red velvet rope meetings. We're going to cover that one. There are things like capabilities briefings and red zone to end zone conversations. So there's all these different conversations that you have in sales. We're going to focus on a really important piece, the front end piece, when you have a prospect that's interested in working with you. So I'm going to script that out for you and show you what that looks like. And by the way, when we're done with this, Lubna Keeley will make sure you guys have a PDF of this and you guys can share this with the members. So, folks don't feel like you have to write this all down. We're going to share these slides with you. All right, so we're going to talk about this 5-part conversation framework to win clients. And we're going to start with number 1 is setting the process. You guys are good at setting a process because you're coaches. And I know that when you're coaching people, you are setting the process for coaching. We're going to do the same thing with our prospects. Number 2, we're going to have a right fit conversation. This is the red velvet rope I was talking about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like so that you're doing that right up front. And I'm going to put in a plug here that right now is you have to have right fit conversations, or you're going to be chasing ghosts, ghost opportunities, things that are not real opportunities, that organizations are just thinking about things, but they're not fully baked yet. Number 3, your capabilities briefing. Number 4, needs discovery. And then part 5 is co-create to 100%. So these are the 5 parts of this framework we're going to talk about today, so that you don't have a situation where the tail is wagging the dog, where you're sending over proposals and it's going nowhere, where you have a decision maker who really doesn't know how to lead a conversation with you about your services, and you're trying to, let them be the lead in the dance partner relationship, but it's not getting you anywhere. We don't have time for that. Okay, so when do you set the process? So you're going to set the process with your prospects 3 different places. So if a prospect calls you for an opportunity, a lot of you guys, I'm sure, get great referrals from people clients who've loved working with you. Maybe folks find you on the ICF website or in a coaching directory. Maybe they heard you speak at a conference. So they reach out to you and they're interested in talking with you about coaching. In that case, you're going to stop and you're going to set your process with them. Next, what if you're prospecting to them? You're not just putting out information on the internet, hoping someone finds you, but you're being proactive. You're following up with people. You're doing outreach. You're getting strategic introductions. You're introducing yourself to companies right in your backyard. You're prospecting out to companies on target lists, maybe the best places to work in Fort Lauderdale or Miami, and you're doing all of that outreach. At that point, what's going to happen is for some of them, it's going to work. They're going to be thrilled that you emailed yourself and said, hi, I just want to introduce myself. I know a lot of organizations are going through a lot of transition right now. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of conflict on teams as everyone's adjusting to the current work environment. If you're looking for a coach, I would love to be someone that you reach out and speak to. And they write back and they say, fantastic. We were just talking about this. We would love to talk to you. You're like, great. I'm so glad you want to talk to me about my services. Stop and set your process right then and there. It feels weird because you just prospected to them, but the second the momentum changes and they're now pursuing you, it it's still the same stop sign for you to say, I'm so glad. Before we go any further, I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to show you what that language looks like in a second, but you're going to set your process. And then you're also going to set your process if you've been working with a client and now they want to do more work with you. In fact, this is actually one of the trickiest places for folks. They sometimes let their guard down. You've been working with a client for a while. Now they want to do something else with you. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a weird predicament where, you know, they're thinking maybe it's part of your old rate, or that, you know, you're just going to add this on and there's scope creep or what have you. So the second that a prospect wants to engage you in the next piece of work, you're going to stop and you're going to reset your process. So we're setting our process always, no matter if they initiated it or we initiated it or it was some combination thereof. We're always going to stop and set our process. And this is what that looks like. It's long. I know it's going to feel long in the beginning. You're going to thank me later when you guys are having this kind of conversation with your prospect. So it's going to sound something like this. Sophie, we would be thrilled to pursue a conversation with you about how we can potentially support Acme Corporation with its leadership development and employee engagement goals. Before we dive into a conversation, though, we've found it helpful if we take just a few minutes first to share how our initial process works, our initial process, because we don't want them to get this confused with our coaching process, right? I'm going to go ahead and do that now, Sophie, if you're cool with that. Cool? Great. So listen, the first step in our process is to have an introduction and a right fit conversation. And the goal of that discussion is for us to better understand, at least at a high level, Sophie, what type of support you're looking for, and also for both you and for us to get a sense of if we'd be a great fit for one another. We typically need about 15 minutes for this initial right fit conversation, depending on the scope of the initiative that we're even talking about. And if you have time, we can go ahead and actually have this initial conversation right now. Then our second step is to have what we call a capabilities and priorities conversation. And during this conversation, we provide a bit more context about our 4 core areas of leadership development that we can help with, as well as the various ways we can work with you. Oftentimes our clients discover we have a service offering that's even a better fit than the thing they originally had in mind. Now, I'm doing something really, really important here, you guys. I'm letting them know that I'm going to tell them about the full depth and breadth of my services in order to create a broader playground and broader context for eventually that needs discovery conversation that we're going to have. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to show up and throw up as some, you know, that's this hard sales pitch. It's a very gentle conversation. It is a conversation, not a sales pitch, but this is creating the time that you need in this process to let them know that, look, you might have trainings, you might have coaching, you might have team coaching, you might have assessments, you might even do a little bit of consulting work, or somebody on your team might do consulting work. We have coaches in our programs who have communications people on their team, because sometimes the work that comes out in the coaching requires now new communications to be created. So this is creating this space for you to be able to have a conversation and not be pigeonholed down into providing a quote for $5,000 for a half-day training on conflict that, let's face it, is not going to solve their conflict problem, right? I'm not saying trainings on conflict are a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's not going to solve their problem, and you're not going to allow yourself to get pigeonholed and anchored, because remember, the psychology of sales, every time that you're interacting with these folks, you're anchoring how they perceive you, what they perceive of your services, who's carrying the greater authority. So we need to make sure that you guys have the chance and that you're saying, I have this process. I know what I'm doing on this, right? Our third and fourth step, Sophie, which can also happen during that same meeting, provided that we schedule sufficient time to cover all the details, is to conduct our needs discovery process, which ensures we thoroughly understand the current situation and specific measurable goals. We're very good at listening, Sophie, so we want to hear all about it. We want to understand exactly what's going on for you. And also, Sophie, in that process, we do a step we call co-creation to 100%. And unlike many leadership development and coaching companies, we do not use a traditional proposal process, because absent the real-time communication and collaboration that occurs in the co-creation step, organizations do not achieve the most optimum results or the greatest return on their investment. So I just want to lay the groundwork for you that we're going to discuss all those logistics with you. We're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to discuss all of it real time while we're together. And I just want you to know up front specifically how we approach our work with both our new and existing clients, because it's a critical element in the success track record we've been able to help our clients achieve. And it is unusual. Not everybody's used to this process. So keeping all of that in mind, Sophie, if you'd like to move forward, then we can go ahead right now and dive into the 15-minute introduction and right fit conversation. And then if it makes sense, we'll go ahead and schedule that other meeting as well. Knowing all of that, would you like to move forward? Now, you don't have to call it a co-creation to 100% meeting. You don't have to call it a needs discovery meeting. You don't have to call it a right fit conversation. I don't really care what you call it. I don't even care if you add 3 more steps to this process. What I care about is that from the moment someone expresses interest with you, that you have the words and the confidence and the clarity to say, let me tell you about how this initial process with our organization, with our coaching firm is going to work. Because when you do that, you are establishing a different degree of authority in the relationship, and you're letting them know that they're not going to dictate to you, rushing around putting proposals together. We had a client about a week ago share with us in our Facebook group, in our one of our coaching programs, that sure enough, he skipped this whole step. Because why? Because the decision maker who called him and some other coaches had her hair on fire. She was being very reactive. She was rushing around. It was urgent, urgent, urgent that they get proposals from a bunch of coaches. So he skipped this process. He bent to her process, which was really not well thought through. Sure enough, about a week later, after he spent 8 hours putting together a proposal, he gets a phone call from her saying, listen, I needed to call you because first of all, your pricing is a lot higher than the other coaches. And second of all, what you're proposing and what all the other coaches are proposing is all completely different. And so now the proposals don't match up. So I'm going to tell them that I need some of the things in your proposal, and I need you to add some of the things that are in some of the other coaches' proposal. And then I'm going to try to get, so I can compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges to bananas. What? Like, what? Do you want to be a part of that process? Is that the process you want to be a part of? Because now you're going to be in a situation. I mean, if he says yes to that, and I don't think he's going to, then he could very well be delivering components as part of his proposal to this company that he doesn't even believe in, because some other coach said that they thought that that was the solution. Not a great way to go about working with clients. It's got red flags all over it. Talk about flags on the field. That's not something that you want to get yourself into. Now, what if they object to your process? Because they're going to be like, some of these sites are going to be like, what? In that case, here's some language for you. I respect and genuinely appreciate where you're coming from. And if we were to decide to work together, you and your team will hold my firm accountable for the results we deliver. And after many years of experience and many lessons learned, I've worked with a lot of organizations, Fortune 500, mid-market, small companies. We've designed a process up front to ensure that we're able to glean all the necessary insight and information that we need in order to best be able to deliver a successful outcome, while also being efficient, avoiding a lot of unnecessary back and forth on proposals that are missing the mark, Sophie. And we know your time is valuable. You don't have time to do 6 iterations of a proposal. So this is how we work with both new and existing clients. We'd love to work with you. And I think if we were to follow this process, you can guarantee that we're going to have a great relationship and working together. But we're very confident in our process. So that's how we work with our clients. So it's really about you standing in your power. Somebody, one of our clients who is a coach, some of you no doubt know her. She has this great quote about boundaries, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but no one can cross no one can cross our boundaries unless we allow them to. right? Like, unless we're allowing people to cross our boundaries, they're not. And it's really about whether or not we respect our boundaries, but other people can't really disrespect them. It's us that disrespect our own boundaries. So there you go. And you guys know that better. Like, you guys are probably better at coaching boundaries than I am. Step 2, the red velvet rope. So great. So now what happened is Sophie was actually impressed. Research shows that 89% of decision makers respect when an outside expert, professional service provider type of a company has a process, and that they're showing that they know how to have the dialogue that needs to happen to get that client the result they're looking for. So most of your decision makers are going to love you, and only a very small portion are going to get into a huff about it. So now you're at the red velvet rope with Sophie. And the goal of the red velvet rope conversation with Sophie is to figure out, number one, is this a real opportunity that's even worth your time? And I said to you earlier that this is one of the most important things to figure out right now, because you could chase ghost opportunities. We don't want you chasing ghost opportunities. We want you only focused on the opportunities that are real. Does it have a decision maker with authority to spend the money and to bring in a coach? Have they thought through the timeline for this? Do they have the budget for this? Are they trying to sneak it in and HR knows nothing about it? Learning and organizational development knows nothing about it. So we're trying to figure out, is this a real opportunity, or are they just sort of window shopping and kicking tires? Are they just curious because they have another coaching vendor and they want to see if that coach is overcharging them? So maybe they want to get some pricing from other folks, or maybe they actually have no idea what it is they want to accomplish. And somebody somewhere said, oh, we should have a coach. And so then they're jumping to this idea of having a coach. So that's what you're looking for, but that's not all you're looking for. The other thing you're looking for in your red velvet rope conversation is, assuming this is a real opportunity, do you want it? Do you want it? Over the years, there's only been a handful of corporate clients that we've worked with that have been a total, utter disaster. But I will tell you, from the very first interaction, they showed that they were going to be a nightmare to work with. I've never been surprised. In fact, we have a rule at the corporate agent on both the corporate side and the small business owner side, that if any member of our coaching staff, our trainers, our consultants, our sales team, or even our administrative and operational staff raises a red flag on a client, we remove them early on. We just deal with it early on. But we try the best we can to actually identify it in the sales process so that we don't even get to that situation. And 10 years ago, that was not something I was very good at. I'm going to be honest with you. 5 years ago, darn good. Now, our team is phenomenal at this. So you really want to suss out, are they going to be collaborative? Are they going to be open? Are they willing? I mean, in coaching especially, are they willing to deal with the elephants in the room? Are they willing to talk about the issues? Or do they just want to check a box and say, well, we're doing coaching, but we're not going to actually call out any of the bad behavior on our team, because that would be uncomfortable. That would be awkward. So we're just going to let everybody still behave the way they want, but hey, we have a coach in here, so we're covered. Most of you don't want those kinds of opportunities, right? That's not very rewarding. So that's the other part of this red velvet rope. One of the best questions that I've ever used for a red velvet rope conversation, and this was taught to me at a sales training in New York in probably 2006, 2005, somewhere between 2004 and 2006. So that's how far back that goes. I was at a sales training. I was still in my corporate role, but I was up in New York City. And one of the instructors gave this great question. I wrote it down and I've used it ever since. And that is, can you tell me about another time when you have brought in a consultant to work with your team, and it's been especially rewarding, collaborative, and you loved working with them, you got tremendous results. Can you tell me about another time that happened? And what's interesting is if they can't tell you about another time, and in your case, you guys, you would make it about a coach, right? Have you ever brought in a trainer? Have you ever brought in a coach who, whether for yourself or for your team or elsewhere in the company, and you felt like it made a huge difference in the way the team was coming together and communicating and how you were leading? You know, if they can't point to another time that was really positive, that should be concerning. But even more concerning if they say something like, oh, no, I mean, I can't wait to work with you because every time we bring in someone, it's just a nightmare. So there's one common denominator, right? What are the chances that all the people they brought in were difficult? Right? So that's an example, you guys, of a red velvet rope question. Are there any other red velvet rope questions that you guys like to ask? If so, I feel free to share those here and I'll come back and catch those. That's one of my favorite. Another one that I like to ask is specific departments being involved. So if I'm going in to work with an executive, for example, I will say, is corporate communications involved? Is human resources involved? Is the head of sales involved in this engagement? Because if they're not involved, it really gives me pause that something's going on that I don't know about. So there you go. And here's one of those great questions. Can you share a little bit with me about what role specifically learning and organizational development will play in this top leaders meeting? So that's a question you'd want to ask if you're off talking to, you know, an executive vice president of a business unit, and HR is nowhere to be, you know, found. L&OD seems to be nowhere to be found. You know, that's a great question to ask. Yep, exactly. Who is the executive sponsor for this project? That is a fantastic question to ask. And where that sponsor is or isn't can be a good, you know, choice. You guys might also want to start asking, you know, what is the view of coaching in your organization? What is your philosophy around coaching employees? How do you all see that as, you know, do you see it as a strategic asset? Do you see it as a must-have? You know, getting them really talking about how they see it is a great thing to do right now. Okay, so then the next step in the process, step 3, and we already set this up with Sophie, is to share your capabilities briefing before you do needs discovery. Do your capabilities briefing before you start poking around finding all the problems. For one thing, it's anchoring the right thing. For another thing, it's going to open the discussion to things that they may not have shared with you, that they may not have thought of, especially if your capabilities briefing is done the right way and it has some example stories in there of other organizations who've had breakthroughs, if it shows the various problems that you can help them solve. You know, we have clients who have beautiful spreads of the various sort of issues that can come up in an organization. And when they share that as part of that process, before they start digging into the problem, suddenly the client starts offering up, oh, well, that's a problem too. So you can help with that too. And so it reshapes the needs discovery. But you have to remember, prospects are never going to ask you for something unless it's in their awareness. If they're not aware of a solution that's out there, if they're not aware, I mean, if they've never heard of ghosting before or shadowing, if they've never heard of a discovery phase, if they don't know of certain assessments that are out there, then they're not going to come to you and ask you for those things. So we have to do our capabilities briefings up front. And you can keep them short. You can get through most capabilities briefings. If you do them right, you can get through them in about 10 to 15 minutes. And it can be very, very interactive with the client. And they're going to offer up more than you can possibly know. And then the next step at that point is to move into step 4. Now you're finally ready to do your needs discovery conversation with them. And there are some questions you want to make sure you cover. We go into really in-depth scripts on this, but here are some of the big ones. If you were just going to boil it down to just like the most important things to ask, number 1 is, why have they arrived at the diagnosis that they've arrived at? Like, why do they think, if they say it's conflict, if they say it's emotional intelligence, if they say it's lack of creativity, if they say it's lack of leadership skills, why? Number 2, what are they already doing about it? because chances are that no organization is coming to you who hasn't done anything for leadership development, that hasn't done anything for employee engagement. Number 3, what's driving their sense of urgency? Why now? I will tell you, if there isn't something driving the urgency, something very, very, very specific on their calendar that's driving the urgency, then a new fire is going to come up tomorrow that's going to back burner this fire. So you've got to find the urgency, and the urgency has to be tied to something on the calendar. That's the only kind of urgency that matters. That's it. If there's not something on the calendar coming up to force their hand, then I don't care how painful the status quo is. If something else pops up tomorrow, they'll just continue to deal with their current pain and frustration for a bit longer. And then what's the problem currently costing them? That's a big one. Yep. And then lastly, we move to co-create to 100%. And this is the part that everyone skips. This is the little letter G that no one does. And that is to sit there and build out the program with the client. Every last detail of the program gets built out with them right then and there, you guys. Now, that's hard because here's what usually happens. Typically, after you do needs discovery here, out of habit, the prospect will say to you, now they've kind of put everything out on the table. They got it all off their chest. They completely unloaded on you. They told you all the things they want. They told you what they don't want. They told you all their problems. They told you stuff they probably shouldn't even have told you. And then at that point, now that they've sort of released all of that pressure, they will typically about 75% of the time say to you, okay, great. So can you put together a proposal for me? Can you go ahead and put together a proposal? And that's the moment that you get to not worry about the toothpaste because you already dealt with it before it came out of the tube way back in that very, very first conversation with Sophie. Because you're going to be able to say to Sophie, I'm so glad to hear you're interested in hearing our recommendations and hearing our thoughts. If you remember, we talked about our process being a little bit different. So we're not quite there yet. I'm certainly happy to put everything in writing for you, but here's what we're going to do now. We're actually going to co-create what this looks like together so that we're not guessing what you need. This is going to be a collaborative process. And that's why we schedule a little extra time today to do that. And then you just move right in to co-creating with the client. So they're going to forget. They're going to boomerang back to asking for the proposal, but that's okay. You're going to remind them that they agreed to your process early on. Like it's no big deal. You're going to remind them why you built in the time that you did and that we're going to co-create this together to make sure it's exactly what they need based on everything that you just shared. And this list here, I'm not going to read all these boxes to you, but these are all of the things that you're going to cover in that co-creation conversation with the client. So here's something interesting. Gartner did a lot of research around Gartner. A lot of people know Gartner is an IT consulting company, but they actually do a lot of research around sales, especially really complex sales, not even simple sales like consulting and coaching, but really complex sort of enterprise-wide IT systems and things of that nature. And what they found was pretty surprising. They found that in situations where the outside firm, the professional services firm, clearly defined the process and led that process with their clients, actually made it 86% easier on the prospect, that it took that much weight and that much pressure off the buyer side of the table when they did this. Now, we didn't get into this in my bio, but when I was in corporate, I managed millions of dollars in ads, in budgets, in ad spends, in vendor spending, in all sorts of programs. And I hired hundreds of outside consultants, coaches, software providers, vendors, mural painters, shipping companies, radar companies. I mean, you would not believe the stuff I had to hire. And I would tell you that probably maybe 2 out of 100 sales conversations that I would have with outside experts and vendors and service providers actually came in and made my life easier. came in with a plan. So this is exactly how we're going to go through the process together, made it collaborative, really listened to what I needed while also proactively sharing with me the information that I wouldn't even have known to have asked. And so when I share with you all of these scripts, I share it with you as someone who was on the corporate side and who can attest to the fact that it is a lot easier on the other side. And in fact, it's how I built these scripts, because when I left my corporate job and I was selling back to the corporate space, I knew I had to approach those conversations very differently. So here you go. So this is the summary again. So you're going to set that process. I gave you the script to set the process. With their permission, you're then moving right into that right fit, red velvet rope conversation, making sure it's a real opportunity, making sure you actually want the opportunity. You're going to then share with them your capabilities, examples of case studies, the problems you can help them solve, the way that you can help them solve it. You only really need about 15 or so minutes for that. Then you're going to move into needs discovery and really understand what their problem is. And then last but not least, you're going to sit at that table, even if it's over Zoom, and you're going to get all the details done. You're going to co-create all the way to 100%. There's not one darn thing you're going to leave that meeting with and go back home and, get out your, magic 8-ball or your Ouija board or any other tool like that in order to try to guess what it is that the prospect actually wanted. That means talking money. That means talking timing. That means talking approvals. That means talking about the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, and the how's. It means all of it. And when you do that, you never again waste time going back and forth trying to guess what people are doing. And that's what allows you to close. That's what makes it a huge difference for you in terms of taking those opportunities with those clients and moving it forward. So I'm going to open up for questions. Before I do that, I just want to give you 2 quick resources. One is a really cool toolkit. If you don't have this, I recommend that you get it off of our website. You have to type in the URL because you can't just find it on the website. But there's a really cool resource in here that I want to point out to you. It's the one that has that beautiful picture of the swings at the carnival there. That document has 7 different $100,000 engagements broken out for you. In terms of if you're going to do $100,000 engagements with companies, what are those components that you should be looking at incorporating so you're not just trying to get there one coaching client at a time? And so that's one of the best resources that we put together for free, that we make available for free. And you can get it at thecorporateagent.com/influence. It's a really, really phenomenal document that's going to help you make sure that you're not just doing the coaching piece of it, but you're adding some things on that are really going to help your business and help your clients. The other thing I'm going to mention super quick is we were supposed to do this in person in June, right at the Westin Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort, you guys, like right on the water. We had the huge ballroom reserved on the 2nd floor, their massive ballroom with that huge atrium and overlooking the ocean. We were supposed to be there in June. We moved it to October, supposed to be there in October. Obviously, that's not happening. We're actually flying up to Charlotte, North Carolina to broadcast the event from a stage in a ballroom in a hotel, working with the team that's now producing all of Tony Robbins's virtual conferences as well. So it's a huge production, but you won't be there in person. But we are doing 15 hours of ICF resource development credits for attendees. We're using the same process that they used at ICF Converge in Prague. There's going to be a code at the end of every session. Then the coaches will turn that code into us, and then we're going to give everyone a certificate for the sessions that they completed. So if any of you do need resource development credits, more importantly, if you want to learn that entire business development framework, because we just kind of focused on letter G or F today, excuse me, we focused on letter F today of the Conversations Create Cash system. But if you want to know the whole system of how to do marketing and business development, we teach that at this conference. That's what we teach. I will also mention to you, and then I'm going to do questions, that the vice president from the Association for Talent Development, ATD, is actually giving a keynote at this conference. UPS will be there, Accenture, ADP, Lumen, which is a Fortune 150 company, and some other, Kaiser Permanente. We have an amazing corporate panel group that's going to be there speaking, but I'm most excited about two speakers. The vice president of ATD talking about their brand new research on how companies are changing where they're putting their dollars in training and employee development, like coaching. So they're going to be sharing that brand new data with us at the conference. And the CEO of the Muse is speaking at the conference. And if you're not familiar with the Muse, over 75 million millennials, Gen Z, minorities, LGBTQ community, and other diverse candidates use the Muse along with all of the Fortune 500 in order to find jobs. So it's kind of like an Indeed.com, only completely different. They've completely revolutionized the process. And she is sharing with us what they have found in terms of what's going on in attracting and retaining and developing the best employees, what the candidates are looking for, what the employers are looking for, and all their research that they've been doing on this. She's completely revolutionized that side of things. So those are two incredible sessions that I personally am really excited about hearing what they have to say. They did share a little bit with me about the data from ATD. It blew my mind. It was not what I was expecting. So mostly good news though, actually, mostly good news, but you do need to know where those dollars are about to go. Okay, so we're gonna open up to questions, and you guys can type them in, or Lubna, if you wanna unmute people, however you wanna handle it, Lubna is fine with me. Good, Angela. Yep, Angela just said she has her VIP ticket. I'm glad. I'll look forward to seeing you there. Let me take off the, let me just take this down. I have to figure out how to do that. Stop share. There we go. Oh, disappeared on me. Okay, Lubna, if you want to open up for questions. I did see one come in here in the chat area. Who will have a comprehensive meeting like this up front? They ask for proposals just to avoid this. Well, Mike, that's completely up to you if they do or if they don't. I would tell you 90% of our clients do this and get the meeting because they handle it differently and people respond to you differently. You know, it's no different than in coaching, right? When you guys walk into to work with a leader, and let's say the leader can't get anyone to follow through on their work, or the leader can't get anyone to not just show up in their office with a problem and wanting the boss to fix it, right? And you propose that what if the employees actually brought solutions to the table, and the manager says to you, who's going to do that, right? Like none of them do that, right? And as a coach that it can be very different, because the second that the leader expects something different and communicates something different and sets that relationship up in a different way. And you guys see that change all the time. I know you do. I know the kind of work that you do that's transformative. This is no different. When they reach out to you and you say to them, I would love to be considered for this, but let me tell you how our firm works, because it is different than other coaches. But if you've seen some of the successes on our website, like our recent client who just increased employee engagement by 72% over 12 months from where they were, there's a reason that happens. And I'm going to tell you what it is right now. The process we use early on sets the stage for success the whole way. So I'd love to talk with you about what that process is and why it matters. Now, you're going to either intrigue them at this point and then be like, oh, tell me more. We've literally, Mike, had people who've taken with you're not talking over them, you are being respectful, but you're standing in your power and you're standing in what works. And so what happens in most cases is they will say to you, huh, yeah, okay, well, let's have that conversation. I'm curious what you have to say about this. Now they're intrigued. They are completely intrigued, and you completely, in many, many cases, we've watched entire fields of competitors be wiped out by this because they didn't want to talk to those other people who were just going to roll over and provide a proposal. They suddenly wanted to talk to an expert who was willing to invest this time with them, who was willing to listen, who was willing to collaborate with them on doing this. Now, you know, look, at the end of the day, we're all the CEOs of our own companies, and we're all going to do what we want to do for our own business. I'm just offering to you a process that's worked now in my business since 2006, when I walked out the door of my Fortune 100 corporate job that I had, and that has since been used by thousands of people. And so it completely changes the dynamics. Now, government RFPs are a little different, right? If there's a company that's issuing an RFP, we have a whole other training on RFPs, and RFPs, you have to do this later in the process. Once you get past the RFP part where you actually get the conversation, we have almost a simpatico process for that, but you just have to do it later in the process, or you can't even get there because of the RFP. But if it's not an RFP situation, you can do this 100% of the time. And it honestly, it is no different than when you guys shift the energy of a boss or a manager or a leader, and you watch how the behavior of the employee changes to meet this sort of new dynamic. That's the best analogy I can give you of it. How would you suggest adapting this framework for new coaches seeking individual clients? Well, I think that's a fantastic question. And you actually can use this for individual clients. And what's great about it is that individual clients have absolutely no idea how to select a coach. They have no idea no one's ever taught someone, how do you find a coach, right? And there are a lot of coaches today. You guys know that. You saw the new ICF report that came out this week, right? So you know that there's a lot of coaches, more and more people are getting certified as coaches, and not everybody's putting in the work like you guys are, being really active in your practice, in your fields. There's a lot of people out there who have a really fantastic, snazzy website with lots of gold and pink and green and lifestyle photos that are really expensive, but they're not necessarily a great coach per se, right? So what you want to do is go through the exact same process, except you want to insert into this process during the red velvet rope section. You want to tell them what they should be looking for when they hire a coach. You want to make sure that part of that red velvet rope process is, let me share with you, whether you work with me or work with someone else, I want to give you some guidelines on my philosophy of what you should be looking for and asking when you're hiring a coach. And so by doing that, by layering that piece in there, you're making it a little bit more designed for the person. When you get to the capabilities briefing part of it, that's where you're going to shrink that down just a little bit, but not a lot, to really walk them through your different programs that you may have. Maybe you have a 6-month, maybe you have a 12-month, maybe you have a mastermind, maybe you have something that involves a strategy day or just coaching calls. So you still want to do all of that process with them as well. And then you do want to co-create. And the co-creation might be setting up the goals, setting the start date with them. If any of you guys have ever sent over a proposal or an invoice, or even like a pay by credit card link to a client that you thought was going to sign up and then they didn't sign up, it's because you didn't do the co-creation part of it, where you really were showing them, this is what we're going to focus on. This is the timeline. This is when we would start, and really get it all the way into the end zone. For those of you who are football fans like me, it's all about getting it into the end zone. If you fumble in the red zone, what good was that? What good was running that football all the way down the field to fumble in the red zone? So the idea with an individual client is to make sure that you're educating them on what they should look for in hiring a coach. And obviously you want to make sure that you meet those requirements, right? So if you say, well, you should find a coach that practices what they preach, obviously you want to be a coach that practices what you preach. So it's somewhat self-serving, but it should be honest and full of integrity. It should be, if you really believe people should look for a coach that specializes in a certain area, or a coach that, uses certain assessments, or a coach that structures their coaching in a certain way because it really helps people to change behavior, then share that with them. The biggest thing that you don't want to do right now is be like everybody else. That's your biggest risk, right? Is that you end up losing a client because your website wasn't as snazzy or your Instagram wasn't as fancy as someone else, which is pretty silly. But that is the world that we're in unless we take control otherwise. I think there's another question. If you guys want to type in any other questions here. Executive sponsor.
Okay, guys, any other questions before?
Yeah, I was gonna say, feel free.
We have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to make sure that we answer your questions.
Lubna, do you have any questions for me?
I do have one for you.
Okay.
If there was one thing that you perceive to happen, from COVID to what's next, what would that be for you, Angelique? What is your
in
your
terms
vision
of
and
in terms of like sales and selling, or in what way?
in terms of coaching and training and consulting this field, because I know you're very strategic and you hold a lot of strategic sessions with the like of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, one of the biggest things, obviously, is that companies are going to completely change their work structures. We're hearing from executives and employees at all levels of organizations right now that old paradigms of sort of us versus them have actually broken down in a lot of organizations. A sort of an unexpected consequence of everyone working from home was the Ivy Tower, if you will, came crashing down. The Ivy Tower came crashing down. Suddenly, employees were on Zoom sessions with C-level executives of their corporation, talking to them over Zoom in a t-shirt with their dog sitting on their lap. I'm talking about the executive in the t-shirt with their dog sitting, or a baby in their arms, or their kids running into their office, and their golf clubs leaning against the wall in the back, and their family photos behind them. And so in a lot of companies, and I experienced this when I was in corporate myself, I worked directly with the C-suite in all of my jobs. And from the time I was right out of college until I left, I was always working with the C-suite. And I would be in an elevator at times, and I would make a joke to another employee. And I was in my, at this point at time, I was in my 20s, and I'd make a joke to someone like, oh my gosh, well, don't get on the wrong side of Mayo today. And Mayo was the name of one of our, Mayo Shattuck was one of our CEOs. And the person would say, Mayo who? Mayo? What are you talking about? As though I was talking about mayonnaise or something. And, a lot of employees inside of companies, large companies, don't even know the name of their board of directors. They don't know the name of the C-suite or the heads of the business units. The individual contributors and the first line managers often don't even know those names. But that has actually started to change with COVID, because employers are hopping on Zoom on a regular basis and having much more casual conversations, and employees are being really responsive to it, and they love it. And I think the biggest risk for companies is to go back to the old guard, to go back to this old sort of like, well, we're in the Ivy Tower and you're not, and we're going to have these really formal communiques that nobody actually wants to read. But really, a lot of executives are waking up to this, and they're like, wow, this is so great. We should have been communicating with our employees like this all along. And people in corporate communications and HR everywhere are going like this, like, because they're like, we've been telling you this. So I think that, Lubna, is going to be that genie can't go back in the bottle. Employees now feel much more connected to leadership. And so I think the biggest mistake any company could make would be to put those walls back up. And I think as coaches, you guys can help these organizations lean into this open, transparent, high integrity, ongoing like just direct conversation with their employees. That's what's going to drive trust. That's what's going to keep people engaged. That's what's going to deepen loyalty. And frankly, it's going to help employees actually understand how their work connects to the bigger picture of the organization. And I know that work is near and dear to all of your hearts as well. So I would say, Lubna, for me, that very surprising development of how executives communicating in their sweatshirts, literally, has completely changed company cultures more than any culture. And we've literally had vice presidents say this to us. I was talking to a vice president of a 500,000 person firm, and she said to me, Angelique, we've run culture programs here for over a decade. Nothing has changed our culture faster than us all talking to each other like real human beings, face to face, in our human environments that we're all in. Like, this was better than any culture program I could have ever run for this company.
Well, that brings me hope, Angelique, because it's the clarity and transparency that we're missing in many organizations. And yes, the tower is no longer there; it's broken. So it's good.
The tower is broken. The tower is broken. Somebody asked me, I'm just going to throw this up because someone was asking me about this, Lubna. So we're able to offer resource credits, which obviously ICF has two different types of credits that you guys can do, because we don't teach coaching skills, right? We're teaching business development skills. We can do the resource development credits, and we're able to do up to 15 of those credit hours. So each of our segments for this conference are broken into 75-minute segments. So we can do 1.25 credit hours for each of those segments over the course of 3 days. It's from 10 to 5. So there's 4 75-minute segments a day. And then at the end of every one of those segments, there will be a code that we provide, so we know that people were actually there. And then at the end of the conference, we'll have everybody submit those codes into us. We'll know which sessions you were at, and we'll email a certificate to you with all the details that ICF requires. So that's how we're doing that. We are, doing everything we can on our end to be in alignment in terms of, what needs to happen. Obviously, if people share a code, that's on their integrity, not mine, right? So, but we're certainly following, we're going to follow those rules in terms of making sure that we're giving the codes and capturing those.
And we appreciate you doing the CE credits for coaching. This is great. And want to thank you so much, Angelique, for this. This was very helpful. And from Mike, this presentation was excellent. I've had a lot of sales training since starting my own business, and this rate's at the top.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. Thank you. We try to cut out all the junk and just just worry about the stuff that's actually going to be at the table that you guys really need to worry about, because there's a lot of stuff you can get, caught up in these days, a lot of nets you can get caught in. And at the end of the day, you really need to master those conversations with those decision makers.
And Mesha agrees. And from Anne, this event was a great shot in the arm, stimulating new and renewed techniques. So.
Oh, good. I love giving people a shot in the arm, shot in the arm, kick in the pants, however.
I do want to remind everyone that there are many free things that Angelique offers on the website. I think you did share the URL. You have the recording, so you can go back to it. But if you did not, maybe Mary can help me put the URL again so people can see it, copy it. Lots of templates to use, your email templates. Yes. I have personally used, and they're amazing. So thank you for being a giver and for also creating that next level for the coaching community, because you are taking us to the next level. And I can assure you, from someone who's tried and copied many of Angelique's webinars on paper, that when you show your client that you have more than one opportunity, they do keep you in mind if they like you, of course. If they don't like you, oh yeah. But if they like you, they find things for you to do. They want you to stay. So all the best, and thank you, ICF South Florida members and guests. More webinars coming up, and we will be having a few virtual connects soon. Mesha, you and I will work on those to join and to connect and to work, specifically one to work on what Angelique offered and shared. So great seeing you all. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put in the chat or to just unmute. And if not, you always have info@icfsouthflorida.org for your questions. Thank you for being here.